Investment banks like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan employ thousands of employees on H1B visas, from low-level analysts to MDs heading departments. The state of H1B visa hiring is changing, however, as a result of a $100,000 fee for H1Bs introduced by President Trump. Many of the people banks were hiring on H1Bs came from India, and now, to combat the fee, banks are simply hiring in India instead. Find out why on the Coffee Run. According to Bloomberg, the top 6 US investment banks employ over 150,000 employees in India in what they call Global Capacity Centers, or GCCs. The people in these GCCs aren't doing back-office work traditionally associated with outsourcing efforts. Instead, Indian hires work in quant research, risk, engineering, and investment teams. The other back-office work is still outsourced, mind you, just to countries like the Philippines. GCCs are located in multiple cities, including Bengaluru, Hyderabad, and Mumbai, and headcount in these centres is expected to rise as a direct result of the H1B policy changes. In case you're unaware, the H1B visa system operates via lottery. Currently, companies pay a small fee to enter an employee into that lottery. There are a set number of people picked, and those winners get to relocate to America for the role. Trump's new policy means that if someone wins a lottery place, their employer must pay $100,000 or they don't get their visa. It's not necessarily a deal breaker for banks. The average salary for H1B hires in banking is well above $100,000, and if you expect to keep that employee around for multiple years, it's a drop in the ocean of what you're spending on them in total. A pretty big drop, but a drop nonetheless. That said, it becomes harder to justify certain H1B hires whose roles didn't necessarily need to be in the US in the first place. Bloomberg reports that graduate engineers in GCCs earn, on average, roughly 300,000 rupees per year, equivalent to $3,384. Indians on a US visa will instead earn roughly $60,000. If you factor in the $100,000 visa fee, an Indian H1B graduate engineer costs almost 50 times as much as an Indian native for their first year of work. Another reason these GCCs may be getting built out, though, is so the bank has the option of alternative visa methods. L1 visas are available if an employee has worked for the company in an office outside of the US for 2 years. Building out teams in India today means the pool of talent readily available to move via L1 visas goes up in the future. If there's a particular person that a bank wants to bring into the US as soon as possible, they may instead try for an O1A visa, given to recipients of international awards or people who satisfy a number of criteria to signify importance, such as appearances in news articles or a salary above market rate. When we looked back in September, those same top 6 banks employed more than 6,000 H1B visa employees between them. JP Morgan had the most, filing over 2,000 salaries on the H1B visa salary database. Goldman Sachs was the only other bank to employ over 1,000, while the rest had multiple hundreds of H1Bs. It's not just the US banks hiring them, though. Barclays, Deutsche Bank, and UBS employed over 1,000 H1Bs between them. Most of these roles, however, aren't the most lucrative jobs in banking. Less than 100 of those 7,000 H1B employees earned a salary of over $300,000, and very few were at managing director level. This is partially because if you're senior enough to become a managing director, you've likely lived in the US long enough to have gotten your green card. Rather than being excited about the increased availability of jobs, many bankers may be wondering how this migration to India will affect their day-to-day operations. After all, banks like JP Morgan have been bringing staff back to the office 5 days per week under the guise of FaceTime, collaboration, and mentorship. Now, those people have to increasingly collaborate with people 5,000 miles away. What happens when these teams are scattered across continents? An executive at one mid-level US investment bank engaging in excessive outshoring told us that it was bad news for junior bankers who got little clarity on their career paths as origination roles became execution ones. He said that London bankers were made to train the hastily promoted staff in India who ultimately replaced them. There are also concerns of the work conditions that staff in India are subject to. At the start of this year, Harish Prasad, a VP at BNY Mellon, spoke publicly about bullying that his wife, a VP at Deutsche Bank, allegedly received. Prasad alleged that his wife's boss shouted at her in a town hall, said nobody in his team was allowed to fall sick, and alleged that his wife was forced to travel into the office during a dangerous monsoon season. An analyst working at a US bank in India recently told us his bank is abusing India's labour laws to fire staff without paying severance by placing them on performance improvement plans, or PIPs. He alleged that these PIPs are heavily driven by politics and that people who are rated highly by their colleagues receive artificially low scores from their managers to justify cutting them. As banks continue to grow, Indian employees will hope that kind of behaviour gets left in the past. That's not the only big story in finance this week. HSBC's job cuts have been some of the most unusual in banking, not least because of the shocking closure of its M&A and ECM businesses in the US and Europe. Now, insiders at HSBC have spoken to The Times about why the bank went cold turkey on its New York and London bankers. Insiders said HSBC dropped the bomb about closing whole businesses suddenly to prevent senior people there from playing politics. When the move to close whole swathes of the investment bank was announced in January, it came as a shock to many of those involved, including senior people who suddenly learned of their fates overnight. This was deliberate. If the move had been flagged in advance, it seems HSBC thought it would get political with senior people trying to protect fiefdoms. Instead, it was announced as a quick, brutal, done deal. That being said, all these cuts have proved mightily costly for HSBC. Thousands of people left the bank this year, and as a result, it has paid roughly $800 million in severance payments and upfront costs, according to its Q3 results. While we don't know how much individual senior bankers received on their way out the door, severance payments in 2024 reached as high as $9.4 million for some of its most senior employees. Even factoring that expense in, however, the bank says it has actioned an annualized cost saving of $1 billion in just the last 9 months. It has also, in spite of the cuts, grown its headcount. Full-time headcount, at least. The results showed that full-time employee headcount increased by 1,105 people in the first 9 months of the year. It cut 140 contractors in that same period though, roughly 3.4% of its total contract staff. Separately, two profiles, courtesy of Business Insider and the Financial Times, show two very different career paths that you can take in your first decade in finance. Business Insider spoke to a 29-year-old newly promoted Goldman Sachs MD who grinded his way to the top in London. The FT spoke to a 31-year-old oil trader living in a small French town that made $250 million in just 3 years. Paul Costa, the Goldman MD, runs dividend training in the bank's EMEA Synthetic Products Group. He said he found it strange when he didn't receive a call for his promotion and thought he'd been overlooked. That is to say, he saw his ascension coming. Having joined Goldman as an intern, Costa epitomizes the corporate ladder climbing archetype and dispensed advice about perfecting your craft to achieve success. Christopher Eppinger's life looked very different in his profile. He's in the middle of a €21 million renovation of a villa in France and is filling his home with eclectic art. He doesn't want to stop either, telling Business Insider that he wants to keep trading so he can buy more Picassos. Which life would you rather have? For as much as Eppinger's lifestyle looks luxurious, he was nervous about sanctions on oil trading putting him out of business, although he did insist that he made his money legally. Costa is presumably earning a small fraction of what Eppinger made, but the average Goldman Sachs managing director in London still made an impressive $1.7 million last year. Plus, now that he's made it as an MD, a lot of doors are open to potentially lucrative opportunities outside of banking, or he can go for partner. Whoever wins the marathon may not be the man who wins the sprint. And elsewhere, we at eFinancialCareers have released our annual Ideal Employer Report, surveying more than 15,000 finance professionals on which companies they'd most like to work for. If you followed our previous iterations, you'll be entirely unsurprised to find that JP Morgan has won again, and won by a significant margin, but there's more to it than that. Banks have dominated the list in the past, but this year there was much more fervent support for consultancies as Deloitte, KPMG, PwC, EY and McKinsey all finished in the top 10, with Deloitte finishing second. JP Morgan was absent from the top rankings for the ideal employer for well-being, which featured multiple fintechs, including Coinbase and Binance, as well as hedge fund DE Shaw. Speaking of DE Shaw, it topped the rankings for our Ideal Employer Award for rewarding careers. We're still unveiling the individual winners on our site at the moment, but if you'd like to read the full results and look at other categories like ideal employers in electronic trading or boutique investment banking, you can download the full report via our link in the description. Thank you for watching The Coffee Run. If you'd like to receive daily news updates on stories like these, click the link below to subscribe to Morning Coffee, our newsletter that breaks down the biggest stories in banking and financial services from Monday to Friday every week. Next Friday, we'll be taking a look at one of those stories in more detail and letting you know other important stories you might have missed on The Coffee Run. If you want to see more of The Coffee Run, like this video and subscribe to the channel.